And welcome back. As we go ahead and continue looking at interfaces, now let's take a moment to look at defined constants in our interfaces. So what are defined constants? Well, in an interface, these contain defined constants as well as method headings or instead of method headings. When a method implements the interface, it automatically, of course, would get those defined constants. So the following interface contains constants for months. So for example, public interface month numbers, public static final, int January equals 1, February equals 2, March equals 3, so on and so forth, all the way down to December equals 12. Now, any class that implements the month numbers interface will automatically have those 12 constants defined in the month numbers interface. So if we look at this class here, public class, demo month numbers, implements month numbers, public static void main string args is on print line, the number for January is January. You'll note that the constant January is used in the class demo month numbers, but it's not defined here. Because again, where is that defined? It's defined in the interface. That interface is really handy because what it does is it allows us to automatically get that constant value from the month numbers interface. So think of it as a way of having us to stop from having to rewrite and redefine certain aspects of our code. Now, you might be wondering about instance variables here. Well, any interface that you have can't have instance variables, although it can use the syntax for instance variables as a way to define constants. So any variables defined in an interface must be public, they have to be static and final, which means we can't actually change them. So Java says, hey, you don't have to put those modifiers in there. So the following would be equivalent to the definition of the interface month numbers. Public interface month numbers, int January equals 1, February equals 2, March equals 3, so on and so forth. You notice that we don't have those other pieces in there. Therefore, and we think about it, an interface can be used to give a name for a group of defined constants, so you can easily add the needed constants to any class by implementing that interface. This is really a different use for interfaces than what we've seen up to this point, which was simply to use them to specify method headings. Now it's legal to mix these two by including both defined constants and method headings in a single interface. Now, there is something we have to keep in mind now as we start getting into much more complex interfaces, which is inconsistent interfaces. Java allows a class to have only one base class, but allows for the class to implement any number of interfaces. The reason that a class can have only one base class is that if Java allowed two base classes, those two base classes could provide different and inconsistent definitions to a single method heading. Because interfaces have no method bodies, this problem can arise when a class implements two interfaces. The ideal is that the designer of Java hoped that was to realize that any two interfaces will always be consistent. However, this ideal is not fully realized. The hope was like, hey, they're going to have consistent interfaces. Well, while it might be a rare phenomenon, two interfaces can become inconsistent. Then there's more than one kind of inconsistency that can be exhibited. So for example, if you write a class definition that implements two inconsistent interfaces, that is an error, and the class definition would be illegal. So let's look at this through an example to really kind of see how they could be inconsistent. The most obvious way that two interfaces can be consistent is by defining two constants with the same name, but with different values. So here we have public interface, interface 1, int answer equals 42, public interface, interface 2, int answer equals 0. In both of these, interfaces, let's say we put this into a class structure. We have public class, my class implements interface 1, interface 2. Well, we have a problem because it's going to try to implement both those interfaces, but because it's a defined constant, it can't both be the value of 42 and the value of 0. It wouldn't work. Even method headings can be inconsistent. So if we look at these two interfaces, I have interface A and interface B, and of course I have a int get stuff and a public string get stuff here. And if we had a class definition begins with implements interface A, interface B, well, the method get stuff is going to have a similar problem because it can't simultaneously return an integer and also return a string. In this case, we cannot overload a method based on the type returned, so overloading cannot be used to get around this problem. Instead, we have to address it otherwise. Like if I were to give it a different name instead of get stuff, like maybe one's called get int stuff, the other one's called get string stuff, that would work fine. And so here we are in Eclipse to go ahead and test this out. So here I have interface A set up with our method get stuff. We have interface B set up with our method get stuff. And again, you'll notice one is an int, one is a string. And so let's go ahead to our tester code here. And all I'm going to do is add in implements. And I want interface A. And of course, that's our first one. And of course, right now it's complaining because we haven't put that method in. And we need to, of course, have, it says has to implement that abstracted method. So let's add that unimplemented method in there just so that way it's happy. And now let's go ahead and add in the interface B. All right. And if I save that, now, of course, we are getting an error right away. All right. Before that, as soon as I take that out, go back to here, no error. But as soon as I add in interface B, now all of a sudden we have an error here. All right, and that's because interface B says I need to have this method here. And if I try to add in this method, all right, we have some problems in here. And why do we have problems? Well, the answer is that, again, it cannot override these methods here. All right, it's trying to go ahead and have them do something. So I'm going to just add a return statement here. So we'll just say return null, because string is a class type. We don't know which one of these we want to use because, again, with this interface, it has to define one or the other. So you can notice it'll say multiple markers. It says the return type is incompatible with interface B.get stuff. All right, what about this one? All right, duplicate method get stuff in interface tester. All right, you can't have these both kind of pull from here. If I want to resolve this, I could very easily come in here, for example, like I said earlier, make this get int stuff, get string stuff. If I save that and go ahead and change these to get int stuff and get string stuff, okay, now it's a little happier. Of course, now there's a thing up here that says it's complaining. Let's see what it is. It says it must implement the method get stuff. So let's, oh, we didn't save that class. There we go. Now we don't have those compiler errors anymore because, again, remember, when we're working with interfaces, we cannot have it so that way we have those same method names. You can't overload.